Jacob had always been a wrestler. He was born a wrestler. He emerged from his mother's womb literally grasping his brother Esau's heel. In fact, the name Jacob means heel grabber, or figuratively speaking, usurper. But from that moment on, Jacob would be wrestling with his brother. Because even though they were twins, Esau was born first, and so entitled to the benefits of being the firstborn. But Jacob was determined to wrestle those benefits away from Esau. First, Jacob wrestled away the inheritance. Esau was entitled to a double portion of their father Isaac's property and possessions. Jacob wrestled them away by tricking Esau into trading them for a bowl of stew. Then Jacob wrestled away the blessing. Isaac was to pass Abraham's blessing on to Esau, the promise God made to Abraham that he would be the father of many nations and that the entire world would be blessed through him. When Isaac was old and nearly blind, Jacob and his mother tricked Isaac into thinking Jacob was Esau, and Isaac gave the blessing to Jacob instead of Esau. Jacob was always wrestling and scheming, always living up to his name. Well, our story this morning picks up 20 years later. To escape Esau's wrath, Jacob had fled far to the east to live with his uncle Laban. And in those 20 years, Jacob had done well for himself. He has several wives, 12 sons who will become the tribes of Israel, and many flocks and other possessions. He's a wealthy man. And now God has called him to return to the promised land. And Jacob obeys. He's returning home. But he's afraid. He knows Esau will be waiting for him. In fact, he's heard that Esau is coming to meet him with 400 men. Not a good sign. So Jacob does two things. First, he prays, asking for God's help. And then he schemes some more. He sends wave after wave of servants and gifts ahead of him to meet Esau along the way, hoping to assuage Esau's anger. But Esau is still coming. And I have to admit, I really relate to Jacob here. He prays, and then he gets right back to doing it his own way. I mean, is it just me? Yes, he prays, but prayer is never really plan A for Jacob. Jacob always relies on his scheming. You see, the problem isn't that he doesn't pray. The problem is that he tries to answer his own prayers. The problem isn't that he doesn't trust God. The problem is that he trusts in himself more. And I often do the exact same thing. So how does God respond to Jacob's prayer? He starts a wrestling match of his own. As Jacob sits in the darkness, a man starts wrestling with him. And at first, I'm sure Jacob probably thought that Esau had arrived ahead of his men, maybe to deliver the death blow personally. But they wrestle and they wrestle, and it becomes obvious to Jacob that this is no man. It must be an angel, some kind of spiritual being. They wrestle all night, and dawn is approaching, and still Jacob won't give up. So the angel just touches Jacob's hip and dislocates it. Still Jacob won't let go. Jacob won't let go until he receives a blessing. But before this spiritual being blesses him, he requires Jacob to say his name. What is your name? What is your name? Jacob, he replies. That's right. Your name is Jacob. Jacob the grasper. Jacob the usurper. Jacob the schemer. Ask 10 theologians what this wrestling match means, and you'll get 10 different answers. But I think it shows us that God understands how hard it is to really trust Him. He understands how much easier it is to rely on our own strength and our own schemes. But God doesn't want us to simply wrestle with the world and our circumstances. He wants us to wrestle with Him. Because nothing is more important than wrestling with who God is, and wrestling with doubts about God's goodness and love. Wrestling with the belief that it's up to us to take care of ourselves. But God says, no, I'm right here. Bring it all to me. Don't treat me like some kind of cosmic vending machine. Don't treat me like a genie in a bottle. Bring me your heart. Pour it all out to me. Talk to me. Let's wrestle it through together. Let's have a real relationship. You've heard me say many times that I was a marriage counselor before I was a priest. And I want you to understand this. The couples that I worried about the most weren't the couples that fought the most, but the couples that wouldn't fight. Because at least the couples that were fighting were invested in each other. Their anger and frustration showed that the relationship actually mattered. The couples in the most trouble were the ones whose love had grown so cold that they were beyond fighting, beyond anger. The couples that had all but become indifferent because they didn't believe that anything they could say or do would make a difference. God does not want a relationship of cold indifference. He cares, and He wants us to care enough to show up and have the fight. To show up and have enough faith to wrestle with Him when we need to. You know, a lot of people find prayer challenging, and I am one of them. But prayer shouldn't be challenging because it's boring. Do you know what I mean? We often pray the most boring prayers. Prayers that are boring to us and so almost certainly boring to God. Prayers that are just lists of things that we want God to do. You know, heal this, fix that, change this, change that. Like we're dropping coins into a vending machine. And maybe the things we're praying about are really important things. But if they are, then bring some energy to your prayers. If you really care about something, then say it like you mean it. Make your case. Wrestle for it. You know, the prayers in the Bible are never boring. Just take a look at the Psalms. They're full of, "How long, O Lord? Why have you turned your face away? Lord, when will you come to my rescue? I'm on the edge of the grave here, Lord. Do something." Their prayers filled with raw emotion. I'm telling you, the psalmists aren't afraid of hurting God's feelings. They pray like it really matters, not like they're ticking off items on a to-do list. So bring your questions, bring your frustrations, even bring your outrage to God, because it honors him. And he wants that kind of intimacy with us. Earlier this week, I picked up a Stephen King novel to read. Why? Because it's almost Halloween, of course. But in the preface, he writes about the death of his daughter's cat, Smucky. And he said that after they laid Smucky to rest and all seemed well, he heard strange noises coming from the garage, crying and shouting and these weird popping noises. He writes, "I went out to investigate and found my daughter furious and beautiful in her grief. She had found several sheets of blistered packing material in which fragile objects are sometimes shipped. She was jumping up and down on the packing material, popping the blisters and yelling, 'He was my cat. Let God have his own cat. Smucky was my cat.'" He continued, "Such anger, I think, is the sanest response to grief that a thinking, feeling human being can have. And I've always loved her for that defiant cry, 'Let God have his own cat.'" Right on, beautiful. Right on. You see, Jacob's refusal to let go of God is what raw, honest faith looks like. Faith is not a passive acceptance of what is, but wrestling with the way that we believe things ought to be. Faith is having enough trust in God to bring the hopes and fears of our hearts to God and refusing to let go, because however God answers, the blessing is worth it. Jacob wrestled and wouldn't let go until he got the blessing. And so Jacob got a new name, Israel. And the funny thing about that name is that it can be translated two ways. And the obvious way that the text presents us with is the one who wrestles with God. And of course, that makes sense. But it can also be translated, God wrestles. And that makes sense in this passage too, because God is the one who started the wrestling match that Jacob had been putting off his entire life. I think we need to understand that name, our name, Israel, in both ways. God is pleased for us to be known as his children who care enough, who know him well enough, and so trust him enough to wrestle with him. And he is pleased to be known as the God who cares enough to meet us where we are and to wrestle with us. So how does Jacob's story end? When Esau finally arrives, Jacob is astonished to find that Esau is overjoyed to see him. And the two weep in each other's arms. And when Esau says, "Why did you send all of those gifts ahead? I have all that I need," Jacob says, "Please accept all the gifts that I sent, because I see your face as one sees the face of God." Jacob finally sees. Because he had wrestled with God, he could finally look at his brother, the greatest source of his fear and scheming, and see how God had been at work. The gifts were no longer a desperate bribe. They were a genuine expression of gratitude from a man who had been made whole. When we choose wrestling with God over scheming, we are blessed with new sight, even if we limp a little bit afterwards. We learn to accept God's answer, however it comes, and see the way God is already at work in the world around us. So leave your schemes at the riverbank this morning. Wrestle in prayer and live as one who has seen God's face and been changed forever. Amen.